Hello, all. Welcome to Dragon in Winterfell, a podcast dedicated to discussing works of fantasy and historical fiction. This video is a review of The King's Pleasure by Alison Weir, which just released. I was lucky enough to receive an art copy of this book to give an honest review. So let's go. The King's Pleasure is a novel from the perspective of Henry VIII, spanning from the death of his mother, Elizabeth of York, to his own demise decades later. Using the wealth of research on the Tudor dynasty that she gained as a historian, Weir has crafted a novel that explores the controversial monarch in a way that shows the various and often contradictory sides of this man. After seeing all too many depictions of him that fall back on the overused trope of Henry as a roaring tyrant who spent his days eating and cutting off the heads of his wives, it was refreshing to read of a far more complicated man who wrote poetry, was musically inclined, dreamed of being a heroic warrior, believed in romance and chivalry to a frightening degree, and was deeply religious. And yes, he cuts off some heads. Henry VIII's actions are not reframed to put him in a positive light. Rather, the events are put within the context of his worldview, while making it perfectly clear that he was often hypocritical and ruthless, with a habit of reimagining reality to suit himself. For instance, his belief in romance and chivalry often go counter to his actions, as he cheats on 3 of his wives, executes 2 of them, banishes another because her advanced age has made her useless to him, ends his marriage to another because she doesn't physically fit the romantic heroine ideal he has built in his fantasies, and he uses the threat of arrest to control the last wife. All the while, he enjoys playing out the role of the romantic gallant knight who only wishes to serve the woman he desperately loves. Or should I say, the woman he desperately loves at the moment. It's the same with his deeply religious nature. He is a devout Christian who doesn't seem to think the laws of religion apply to him. He believes women should be chaste, while he prefers to take virgins as his mistresses. He passionately defended the Catholic faith and condemned Protestants, until the Pope dithered on his annulment, at which point he suddenly realized that the reformist might actually be onto something. Basically, Henry VIII is presented as the most fascinating type of monster, specifically because of how human he seems. His flaws are very human flaws brought to a larger scale given the amount of power he wielded against others. Most hypocrites can't send people they disagree with to the headsman, only to cry about it later because, they miss those people they just sent to the gallows. That's what I always found fascinating about Henry VIII, and it's what I love about Weir's depictions of him in this book, as well as in the 6 Tudor Queens series. My main criticism about this book is that it wasn't longer. This novel takes place in the same historical fiction continuity as Weir's 6 Tudor Queens series. So to have Henry VIII's book contain much of the same historical events as all 6 of those novels, but have a similar amount of page space as just one of those novels, made the narrative pacing feel very rushed. It was jarring to go from moments where the characters really came to life on the page in detailed scenes to go to huge chunks of info dumping that glazed over the mountains of information. And it wasn't as though the previous books made up for it, since we're missing out on Henry's perspective and motivation during much of that time. As a result, Henry's relationships felt very simplified, as they didn't get the chance to be fully fleshed out on the page from his point of view. I would also point out that since this novel takes place in the same continuity as the 6 Queens, there were details and scenes that played out differently between this book and those. I'm hoping that my arc was of a previous version of the book that hadn't been edited for inconsistencies yet, and not the final edition. For instance, this arc specifies that Anne Boleyn insisted that she and Henry wear yellow to celebrate the death of Catherine of Aragon. This has not only been proven historically false, as those who were present at that day only noted Henry wearing that color, but Weir had kept to that historical fact in Anne's novel, only having her change into yellow later to match Henry. That may seem like an insignificant detail, but let's be real here. Anne Boleyn is one of the most maligned historical figures of this era. She is often blamed for things she didn't do or things that others did instead, and the yellow incident is one of them. There were other inconsistencies as well, but again, hopefully those were smoothed out in the editing process. Overall, I really enjoyed this book and would definitely recommend it to anyone who enjoyed Alison Weir's 6 Tudor Queens series. In fact, I would recommend reading it as a companion to those. Since Weir also published a novel focusing on Henry's mother as the first in the Tudor Rose series, fingers crossed that the next novel she puts out centers on one of Elizabeth's daughters, Margaret or Mary, both of whom led interesting enough lives to fill novels of their own, despite the fact that they're often overshadowed by their brother's queens. Alright, well, that's enough for me right now. Let me know down below if you're going to check out The King's Pleasure, a novel of Henry VIII, or if you've enjoyed any of Alison Weir's previous works. Bye now.